An Apache girl whispered, "If I give myself tonight, will you keep me forever?" Before we ride into the story, don't forget to like this tale and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. The last light of the sun sank behind the jagged ridges as Nahuel Ironhawk fastened the wire to the final fence post. His gloved hands were stiff from cold and long labor. He gave the line one last pull to be sure it held, then straightened slowly, boots creaking against the frozen ground. His lower back burned with the ache of the day's work. The wind cut sharp across the barren land, dry and biting, as if it meant to strip flesh from bone. He paused, breathing steady eyes, sweeping the horizon out of old habit. This forgotten stretch of Arizona territory was nearly abandoned now. The mining trail nearby had dried up with the gold 2 years earlier, and the nearest settlement lay half a day's ride east. Nahuel hadn't set foot there in 6 months. He had no reason. Whatever he couldn't craft or mend, he learned to live without. The ranch was meager 10 acres of hard pasture and bent scrubland, a creek that dwindled to a trickle each August, and a one-room cabin leaning eastward from last spring's storm. But it was his. Out here, no one asked questions. No one stared too long, and that was worth more than company. He had come after the fire 2 winters ago. His wife, Kiona Dawn, and their unborn child, Suni Little Bird, were taken when a stray ember from the stove devoured the cabin walls. He'd been in town that day, buying nails and a bolt of cloth. By the time he returned, smoke was curling into the sky. He had never forgiven himself, likely never would. So he chose the silence. He worked 8 alone, spoke little, slept less. And that evening, as he turned from the fence toward the cabin, he expected nothing but the usual quiet. At first he thought the shadow crouched by the dry creek was an animal, a coyote, maybe hiding low in the brush. But the form was wrong. Too still. Too upright. He slowed, hand shifting the rifle on his shoulder. A few steps closer, the truth showed itself, a young woman, small and slight, crouched behind a patch of mesquite. Her buckskin dress, once pale blue, hung in tatters, dirt-stained and torn to the seams. Her hair fell long, tangled with dust, braided in places with strips of worn leather. Her skin, sun-darkened, was mottled with bruises. A fresh gash streaked her arm, dried blood down to her wrist. Bare feet scraped raw knees, pulled to her chest, as if she could vanish into the earth. Apache. She watched him in silence, not crying, not begging, just staring. Nahuel stopped. He raised one hand, slowly, palm open. "I'm not here to harm you," he said, voice calm and low, the way he once gentled a spooked horse. "You alone?" No reply. He scanned the brush behind her. Nothing stirred. No others close by. If she'd been part of a band, they were long gone. "Can you walk?" he asked. Still no words. But her eyes weren't empty, sharp, cautious, measuring him. He felt it in his chest. He knew those marks, bruises at shoulder, wrist, thigh. Rope, burns, circling the ankles. The cut on her arm wasn't from a fall. Someone had done this. More than one someone. He shifted his stance, careful not to crowd her. "I've got a cabin half a mile from here. Fire food, bandages. Still nothing. You can follow or not. I won't drag you." He turned, slow and deliberate boots crunching over the dirt. At first only the wind followed him, then faintly steps lighter than his, hesitant but steady. It took longer than usual to reach the cabin. Nahuel walked at an easy pace, never too fast. She stayed 30, maybe 40 feet behind, always in the shadows, always watching. By the time they stepped into the clearing, the sky had darkened. The autumn air had that brittle edge that cut deeper after sundown. Nahuel unlatched the door, pushed it open, and struck flint to lantern. The flame caught spilling yellow glow across the plain room. A cot against the wall, a blanket folded at the foot. A table, one chair, a bench. Small stove at the center. No decoration, no clutter. In the corner, under an old feed sack, sat an unfinished cradle he hadn't burned. It couldn't bring himself to. He stepped aside. She stood stiff in the doorway, her outline caught in the lantern's glow. "You can come in," he said evenly. "Door stays open if you want it." Slowly she crossed the threshold. Her eyes swept the room, checking exits' corners. She said nothing. Nahuel Ironhawk poured water into the kettle and set it on the stove. He opened a tin of beans, sliced a chunk of bread, and cut a strip of cured meat. He didn't rush. When the food was ready, he placed it on a tin plate and set it down, not at the table, but on the bench near the stove. Then he stepped back. She only moved once his back was turned. He heard the scrape of the bench. As she sat, the faint clink of spoon against plate. No chewing sounds, just slow, cautious bites. Nahuel sat across the room, forearms resting on his thighs, eyes fixed on the fire inside the stove. He stayed quiet, asking nothing. When she finished, silence stretched between them until he heard her shift. She set the plate down and knelt on the floorboards beside the stove, not the bench. Knees pressed to the wood, head, bowed hands resting on her thighs. Then at last her voice came. "If I please you tonight," she whispered, eyes lowered, voice rough and uneven. "Will you keep me forever?" The words didn't echo. They just hung in the air, heavy and raw. Nahuel didn't answer right away. His throat worked, his hands tightened between his knees. He felt the weight of what she was offering, the cold bargain she thought was her only price for staying. Slowly he stood. He walked to the cot, lifted the wool blanket, and without touching her skin, draped it gently across her shoulders. Then he stepped back. "You'll sleep warm," he said quietly. "You don't owe me anything." She didn't raise her head. He didn't press. That night she lay near the fire, wrapped in the blanket, her breathing shallow and uneven. He sat near the door with his rifle close, one eye open, sleep a stranger as it had been for years. Before dawn, Nahuel rose as always. The fire had burned low, a faint orange glow pulsing in the stove's belly. Cold seeped through the window cracks. He sat up stiffly from the cot, shoulders pressed to the wall, rifle within reach. Across the room she was still there, curled beneath the blanket on the floor. Her face, half-hidden, hands tucked beneath her chin, not clenched, not braced, just resting. He watched her a moment longer before moving. Quietly he fed kindling to the stove and coaxed a flame. The metal pinged as it heated. No words passed between them. Outside, the land still lay in gray half-light, the air carrying the bite of frost. Snow hadn't come yet, but he could feel it in the way the earth breathed heavy. He would need to ride out soon, check the ridge water barrels and the sagging fence on the east pasture. For now, he cracked the cabin door to let in air, then set beans in a pan and water for coffee. When he turned back, she was awake, eyes alert beneath the blanket watching. "I've got more bread," he said softly. "Ain't much, but fresh enough." She didn't answer, but she didn't flinch when he placed the plate on the bench again. Bread, beans, a slice of dried apple. He poured a second cup of coffee and set it beside her meal before stepping back to the table. This time she rose slowly, steady, though guarded. She picked up the plate and carried it back to the stove, eating in silence. No trembling now, only slow, deliberate bites. Nahuel noticed the small things, the way she favored her left arm, the swelling in her right wrist, the reopened gash on her forearm where dried blood had crusted overnight. Her bare feet pressed against the cold floor, though she didn't show it. When she finished, he gestured toward a wooden box beneath the bench. Bandages in there. Salve, too. Use what you need. You can use them. I won't watch. Nahuel Ironhawk's voice stayed calm. She gave no reply, only moved with caution toward the box. With the blanket pulled around her shoulders, she gathered what she needed and sat cross-legged on the floor. Quietly, she cleaned her wound with practiced hands. Not a flinch. She'd done this before. Nahuel pulled on his coat, tugged the hat down, gloves snug, and slung the rifle over his shoulder. At the door, he paused. I need to check the north fence. Won't be long. She looked up. Stay inside if you choose. No one comes out this far, but if they do, don't open the door. She gave a small nod. Still no words. He hesitated. You got a name. A long beat passed before she whispered, Ayana Moonshadow. He nodded once, then stepped into the morning. The wind had teeth biting across the pasture coat, snapping at his legs, boots crunching the frozen earth. But his thoughts weren't on the fence. They circled back to her words from the night before. If I please you tonight, will you keep me forever? That wasn't something a woman asked, unless the world had taught her it was the only price she had left. It cut him deep, reminded him how broken this land had become, how thin law and decency stretched the farther you rode from town. He worked the fence a while, tightened a rail, checked the wire. Then he rode toward the dry stream bed. In the dust, he found old sign wagon tracks, horse prints, maybe a day or two old, headed west toward the ridge, too far from the usual trail. He crouched, fingers brushing the pressed soil. Could have been cattle. Could have been something else. Could have been people like her. When he returned, Ayana was near the fire, a clean bandage already tied over her forearm, the salve put neatly back. She hadn't touched the door. She didn't rise when he came in, only followed him with her eyes. He closed the door, shook dust from his coat, and hung it by the stove. Someone's been near the canyon, he said. Old tracks, but heading this way. You expecting anyone? Her face didn't change, but her body tensed, a guarded stillness sliding back over her. I escaped, she rasped. Her voice was rough, her hands trembling. From 3 men. They bought me off a trader. Nahuel sat without a word, giving her space to speak. They kept me tied, at night. Her voice held steady, though her hands shook. One was drunk. I waited. Took his knife. I ran while the others slept. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. The bruises, the rope burns, the look in her eyes said enough. You're not going back, he said flatly. She looked at him, then something shifting behind her stare. Not thanks, not yet, something deeper, a question. Why? Because no one should be owned. She blinked, slow, then looked away. Nahuel stood pulled a folded cotton shift from a chest near the cot. Sit on the bench. It's clean. Not much. My wife Kiona Dawn made it long ago. He regretted the words as soon as they left him. Not because they weren't true, but because the air turned sharp, heavy, with the past he didn't speak of. He turned before she could ask. That night she slept on the cot. Nahuel rolled out a bedroll by the door. When he offered it, she said nothing, just clutched the clean dress to her chest and gave a small nod. They didn't exchange goodnights, but before the lamp went out, her voice rose soft, barely more than breath. Nahuel. He looked over. My name is Ayana Moonshadow. He nodded. I know. And then silence again. Not the same as before. But the silence wasn't the same anymore. It carried something new, fragile, uncertain yet real. Both knew they would never be the same again. Winter came sooner than expected. The snow wasn't heavy, not yet, but by morning a thin white crust covered the hard earth like ash. Nahuel Ironhawk stood on the porch, black coffee steaming in his hand, eyes fixed on the gray sky that hung still and heavy with more to come. He took a slow sip, jaw set tight. They were weeks ahead of true winter, but the cold didn't ask permission. If it settled in now, supplies would run thin faster than planned. He'd need to make a trip to town before the pass froze over. Behind him, inside the cabin, Ayana Moonshadow moved with quiet purpose. Each morning she folded the blanket before tending the fire. She never asked where things were, she only needed to see once, and remembered. When she lit the stove, she used half the kindling, as if she already understood they'd have to stretch every bit. She rarely spoke, but her presence no longer felt like that of a stranger. She had found a rhythm here, though caution still lingered in her every move. Nahuel stepped back inside, kicked snow from his boots, and shut the door. "You ever cook beans?" he asked, brushing his gloves on his coat. She looked up from the stove and gave the faintest nod before reaching for the pot. He watched the way she moved, still stiff on one side, favoring her right shoulder, though she masked it well. The swelling in her wrist had gone down, and the gash on her forearm was healing clean, but the bruises along her ribs remained, some fading, some fresh. "You'll need to stay here while I ride into town," he said. She froze, eyes darting to the window. Why, salt's near gone. And flour. If we're gonna last the month, I need to get more. Could snow harder before week's end? A pause. Then quiet. How long will you be gone? Back before dark. I don't talk to many folks. Don't plan to start now. She hesitated, then nodded, but her hand stilled on the spoon. Her shoulders stiffened, guarded once more. Nahuel caught it. "You think I'd leave you?" he asked, not sharp, just steady. She didn't answer right away. Then, without looking at him, she murmured, "People leave." For a long moment he said nothing. Then his reply came low and firm. "I ain't people." He let it rest there. He went to the corner, pulled out his canvas saddlebag, and packed the little he'd need. The Henry rifle stayed by the door. He'd only take it if forced. A sidearm beneath his coat, a pouch of coins, and a list scrawled in pencil on the back of a feed sack. By the time he stepped outside, the snow was falling harder. His horse Dusty pawed the frozen ground tail, flicking against the cold. Nahuel checked the cinch, adjusted the bridle, then swung into the saddle. He turned once. Through the frosted glass, Ayana stood at the window, barely visible, her eyes following him. The town was quieter than usual. A few wagons creaked along the main street. 2 men smoked near the blacksmith's shop. A woman swept her porch, though the snow made it pointless. Nahuel didn't stop to talk. He rode straight to the store, handed over the list, and watched Yiska Stonehawk tally the items in silence. Just as he reached for his coin pouch, a name caught his ear. "An Apache girl," someone muttered near the door. "They say she stuck a knife in one of the men that bought her. Still running loose somewhere." Nahuel Ironhawk froze, not enough for anyone to notice, just the stiffening of his back, the pause of his hand halfway to his pouch. Another voice chimed in, low and eager. "Ain't worth much now." The man she cut bled out. "Word is there's a bounty on her head. Folks don't need papers when silver's on the table." Yiska Stonehawk slid his change across the counter. "Need anything else?" "Bullet wax," Nahuel said flatly. He left town without another word. By the time he reached the cabin, the sky had gone near black, his coat crusted with snow saddle iced over. He stripped the tack from his horse, fed it quick, and stepped inside. Ayana Moonshadow rose from her place near the stove. Warmth filled the air, the smell of beans laced with something sweeter, apple boiled with cloves. Nahuel unwrapped his scarf and set the bags down. Someone from town might come asking. Her face paled. She didn't move, didn't speak. They said you killed a man. I did, she said, voice tight. He was drunk. Tied me by the neck, burned my leg with a poker when I wouldn't. She stopped, jaw clenched, eyes wet but hard. Nahuel nodded slowly. Then he got what was coming. Her eyes widened, surprised. I didn't bring you here to pass judgment, he told her. But I need to know if someone comes asking, do you want me to hide you, or do you want to run? I want to stay, she whispered. If you'll let me. Nahuel held her gaze. There was no fear in her eyes now. Only urgency, that bone-deep need for safety, not to be owned, not to be hunted. I'll board the windows, he said. Tomorrow we cut firewood. We'll stay ready. He hadn't used the word we in years. He didn't use it lightly. That night after supper, Ayana sat by the hearth holding a scrap of cloth. She had stitched something into it, rough, untrained, but careful. The shape of a bird, perhaps, or a mark. She didn't offer it, didn't explain, but she didn't hide it either. Nahuel didn't ask. Instead, he pulled the old cradle from the corner, brushed off the dust, and sat near the fire. Quietly, he began carving again, slow and steady. Ayana watched in silence, eyes wide. She didn't ask who it was for, and Nahuel didn't tell. But something was taking root. Something unspoken. Neither of them seemed ready to walk away. The wind stayed low through the night, but by morning the snow had piled deeper heavy along the eaves, crusted thick against the door. Nahuel shouldered it open and stepped into the gray half-light. His breath curled white in front of him, the sky, promising more to come. When he returned inside, Ayana was already up, kneeling by the stove, feeding kindling to the flames. She wore the cotton shift he had given her old buckskin shawl tied around her shoulders. Her hands moved with ease, like she had lived there far longer than a handful of days. Nahuel stomped snow from his boots and shut the door. We'll cut more wood before it stacks too high, he said. She gave a single nod, stood, and pulled on the old boots he'd found for her in the shed. Too big, worn thin at the soles, but better than bare feet. They worked outside in silence. Nahuel Ironhawk swung the axe, splitting logs, while Ayana Moonshadow stacked them neatly beneath the overhang where they'd stay dry. She didn't ask what to do, didn't wait for direction. She simply moved alongside him, as if she'd done it before. When his palms blistered, she pressed the salve into his hand without a word. When the axe stuck hard in a knot, she steadied the next log, bracing it until it gave way. Sweat streaked her brow. She wiped it with the back of her wrist, then looked at him. Your wife, she said, not a question, just a truth sitting heavy between them. He set the axe down slowly. Her name was Kiona Dawn. We were married 5 years. She carried a child the winter before last. His eyes stayed fixed on the stump, not her. I rode into town, stove caught while she was sleeping. A long pause stretched between them. I came back too late. Ayana didn't answer. She didn't move. She walked to the woodpile, set the last log carefully on top, and stepped back. Her gaze drifted to the snow. He saw the restraint in her, the choice not to offer comfort, not to reach for him. It wasn't coldness. It was understanding. She knew grief, like he did, knew how silence could carry the weight better than words. Later, while coffee boiled inside, Nahuel caught her eyes lingering on the carving knife at the table. She lifted her chin. I want to make something. He handed her the blade. She took a block of wood from the pile near the door, settled cross-legged on the floor, and began working it. No request for guidance. No hesitation. Just quiet focus. He didn't ask what she was shaping. That afternoon, Nahuel walked to check the snares near the creek. It was only the second time he'd left her alone. This time she hadn't asked how long he'd be. When he returned, the cabin was warm, the fire steady, and broth simmered on the stove. She had made soup beans, thin carrot shavings, the last sliver of cured ham. Simple, but it smelled better than anything he'd eaten in months. She said nothing, only handed him a tin bowl. He took it with a nod. They ate side by side on the bench, shoulders close, but not touching. The silence between them wasn't empty now, it carried something unspoken. When the meal was done, she lifted the carving from her lap. Rough, unpolished, yet clear a woman, kneeling, one hand pressed to the earth, the other lifted palm open. "It's what I was before," Ayana said softly. "Before I was taken. Before I was traded." She set the figure on the windowsill facing outward. "I don't want to be that again." Nahuel met her eyes. "You won't." A long moment lingered between them. Then her voice dropped low. "If they come." "What will you say?" "I'll say this is my home," he answered firmly. "And you're part of it." She blinked once, steady, then rose. From the old trunk in the corner, she pulled a piece of hide, stiff with age, but clean. Laying it on the table, she took the knife again and began to score lines. Not random symbols, patterns, her hand slow and precise. She was writing. "It's my name," she said. "The old way." Nahuel studied the markings, then her face. "You want it on the wall?" She hesitated, then nodded. He took a hammer and nail, fixed the piece of hide above the stove. When he stepped back, she placed the carving beneath it. More words passed between them that night, but the air itself had changed. The space no longer felt like his or hers alone. It belonged to both of them, and neither tried to deny it. By morning, the snow had thickened, blanketing the pasture in silence. No bird song, no wind, no tracks of deer or fox, just the hiss of wood cracking in the stove and the dull thud of boots on plank floors. Nahuel stirred the pot of beans out of habit, his hands moving steady. He glanced over once Ayana sat near the window, stitching by hand, her face intent in the pale winter light. She found a strip of old fabric in the cedar chest, curtains Kiona Dawn had sewn long ago. With careful hands, Ayana Moonshadow cut them into pieces, shaping them into something new. A dress, maybe a shawl? Nahuel Ironhawk hadn't asked. He only cleared his throat. "If this snow don't break, we'll be locked in a week," he said. "Shouldn't matter. We got wood enough. Food too." She nodded, eyes steady on her stitching. "I boiled the salted meat, set some aside to dry by the stove." He stepped closer, wordless for a time, then took the other end of the cloth, holding it taut so she could finish the seam. Her fingers brushed his, and neither of them pulled away. "You ever sew before?" he asked. Ayana didn't smile, but something flickered in her eyes, a trace of amusement. "I stitched my brother Onak Swiftdeer's moccasins till they wore through." "You got family?" The thread caught mid-pull. She paused. "I did." He didn't press. The storm groaned against the cabin walls, and it was her voice that cut the silence. "Why did you come out here?" Nahuel leaned back in the chair, its legs creaking beneath his weight. Firelight cast half his face in orange glow, the other in shadow. "I served in the war. After that, scouted for the cavalry. Knew these lands better than most men I ever rode beside. Then I married. Thought I could put it all behind me." His jaw tightened, eyes on the flames. When the fire took them, Kiona, Dawn, and Suni Little Bird. I didn't want to be around anyone anymore. Ayana folded the dress and set it aside, her gaze steady. But you didn't leave the land. No, he said. Out here, I could remember them, without being reminded. A silence fell. Then she asked, You buried her? He nodded, back behind the cottonwoods by the ridge. Can I see? He hesitated, then stood. They dressed in silence coats and scarves, pulled close. The snow had stopped, but it lay thick across the field, unmarked and untouched. Nahuel led her past the fence line, past the old feed shed, down the narrow path beneath the bare cottonwoods. At the far rise stood a wooden cross plain and uncarved. No name, no dates. Ayana stopped before it. She crouched, pressed her hand to the frozen ground, and whispered something in her own tongue. Nahuel didn't ask. He didn't need to. When they returned, she hung the finished dress by the stove so the warmth could soften its folds. The cloth had faded to a soft blue, stitched from memory and instinct. Will you wear it? He asked. Tomorrow, she said, and the next morning she did. Standing in the doorway, wrapped in the dress she had shaped from Kiona Dawn's curtains, something gripped his chest. Not grief, not guilt, but something alive pulling him to the present to her. She stepped closer, not touching, but with intent. I want to stay, she said. Not because I owe you, not because I'm afraid. Nahuel's voice was steady. You don't owe me anything. She hesitated. Then what are we? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a folded sheet from the table, the document he had written the day before. He handed it to her. It was a deed of sorts, not notarized, but signed in his hand a declaration. The bearer of this name, Ayana Moonshadow, lives here by right, by choice, and by my word. Any man who challenges it answers to me. Her fingers trembled as she held it. You wrote this, yes. Her voice cracked. Even before I asked, I figured you would. She stared at the paper, then at him. No one's ever written my name before. You carved it on hide, he said gently. Now it's written in ink. The stove popped in the quiet. Outside, snow fell again, lighter now, softer. That night she moved her bedding beside his, not touching, but close enough, and Nahuel no longer slept by the door. He lay near her, not because she asked, but because he chose to. The morning broke quiet, no wind, no snowfall, just the groan of timber walls and the whistle of steam from the kettle. Nahuel opened his eyes to the smell of something cooking. Not beans, not coffee. Something different. He rose slowly, boots thudding the floorboards. Ayana stood at the stove, stirring a pan dressed in the blue garment she had sewn with her own hands. Her braid hung over one shoulder, tied with a strip of leather, her bare feet pressed against the warm boards near the fire. She glanced at Nahuel Ironhawk, but didn't speak. She didn't have to. He pulled on his coat and stepped closer, looking down at the pan. Corn mush. Ayana Moonshadow nodded. Found it in the back bin. Didn't know it was still good. It is, he said. Just needed a soak overnight. They ate side by side on the bench, elbows brushing now and then. Neither one pulling back. The room no longer felt borrowed, it felt lived in. Nahuel noticed the small signs of her presence, her carving resting on the mantel, her blanket folded carefully near the cot, the blue dress washed and drying by the stove. After breakfast, Ayana stood and said plainly, I want to wash. Nahuel blinked. The creek was frozen solid. There's a basin. A cloth. I'll heat water. He didn't argue, just handed her a clean towel and filled the kettle. She bathed behind a blanket hung in the corner, her silhouette faint in the lamplight. He didn't look. He sat at the table instead, cleaning his rifle out of habit. But he heard the sound of water poured into cloth, the steady rhythm of someone who knew how to survive, with little practical, not indulgent. When she stepped out again, her face was scrubbed clean, her hair damp. She said nothing, only folded the blanket and wiped the floor where the basin had been. "I'll ride to the trading post next week," Nahuel said. "Just a day out. Want me to bring anything?" She considered. "Thread, a comb, maybe coffee if it's cheap. You sure you don't want to come?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "If anyone there knows me, it'll bring trouble. Safer if they think I'm gone." He nodded. Fair. But he saw something distant in her eyes. That night, Nahuel returned to the cradle. The unfinished thing had sat in the corner for 2 years, a weight he couldn't bring himself to burn. He sanded the edges, carefully smoothing old mistakes. Ayana stitched by the fire, quiet, watching. She didn't ask why. He answered anyway. "Figured it's time I finished what I started." Her hands stilled for a moment, then moved again. "Do you want children?" she asked softly. The question struck deeper than he expected. "I used to," he said, "back when I thought I had something worth offering." She met his eyes. "You do." Silence stretched between them. Then she added, voice low, "I can't promise anything. Not after what they did. I don't know if I can carry. I don't even know if I want to." "I ain't asking you to," Nahuel said firmly. "That's your say. Always." She nodded, and something eased in her shoulders. Her hands relaxed as she worked. Later, after the lamp was out, Nahuel lay awake in the cot, unsure why sleep hadn't come. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe the way the wind had died altogether. He felt her hand reach across the space between them. Just her fingers, no words. He took it. She didn't move closer, didn't ask for more, but she didn't let go. 3 days later, the weather broke. The thaw came slow and steady, melting snow into thin streams that trickled down the ridge and soaked into the pasture. The wind shifted west, and the morning sun edged over the canyon wall again. Not warm, not yet, but enough to soften the ground and stir the horses in the pen. Nahuel worked along the fence-line boots, sinking an inch in mud hammer in hand. The post had split in last year's frost, and he couldn't wait any longer. A fresh rail lay beside him. Down by the shed, Ayana pulled nails from old boards with the claw of a hatchet. Sleeves rolled high, her blue dress tied at the knees so it wouldn't drag in the muck. She didn't ask if she could help anymore. She just helped. It was working. Ayana Moonshadow straightened as she walked toward him, handed over the bent nails she'd gathered. Nahuel Ironhawk dropped them into an old coffee tin near the tool bench. Her hands were rougher now, the skin no longer fragile or trembling. She moved differently than the day he first saw her, firmer, grounded. She still flinched at sudden noises, but her eyes didn't dart like a hunted creature anymore. And when she looked at him now, it wasn't fear, it was recognition. That evening they ate together on the porch, boiled potatoes, a strip of dried venison, a handful of apple slices. Midway through the stray from the neighboring ridge slunk into the yard, ribs showing beneath its fur. Nahuel had seen the animal before, but never fed it. This time, Ayana tossed the old dog her scraps without hesitation. "He'll be back now," Nahuel said, watching the mongrel trot off. "Then we name him," she answered simply. He looked at her. Name him, she nodded. You give something a name, it means you expect it to stay. Later, as they stacked more wood, Nahuel spoke the words he'd kept back for weeks. They're still looking. She stopped, her hands frozen around the log. She knew exactly what he meant. I heard it again at the trading post, he went on. A man in a gray coat, asking about a girl who speaks Apache. Said she belonged to some cattleman west of Dry Creek. Gave details, your hair, your eyes. Her hand trembled, though she kept her face steady. What did you say? She asked quietly. I told him I'd seen no such girl. Told him I live alone. Always have. She swallowed hard. Will he come back? Maybe. Ayanna was silent a long time. Then, do I belong here? Nahuel? He didn't answer right away. He set the axe down, turned toward her. You're not a secret to me, he said. If anyone asks again, I won't lie. I'll tell them you live here, that you stay because you choose it, that I keep you because I want to, not because you were bought. Her jaw tightened. That makes me yours. No, he said, stepping closer. It makes you mine only if you say I'm yours. That night they sat by the fire. Her carving still rested on the mantel, her name on the strip of hide above the stove. But now she added another piece, stitched cotton, not leather. A second name, sewn in dark thread. Crooked, uneven, but clear. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. I never asked you, Nahuel said quietly, what happened before. With your family. Ayanna didn't look away. The needle stayed in her hand. My brother Onak Swift Deer was taken. My father Wakan Redbow was shot. My mother Nima Sunflower died 2 winters back from fever. I was the last. Nahuel had no words. He couldn't give back what was gone. But he walked to the half-finished cradle and fitted the final piece into place. It clicked softly. We build new things, he said, even if they're not the same. She rose, crossed the room, and laid her hand on the rim of the cradle. Even if it's just for hope. They stood there together, saying nothing more because what needed to be spoken was already being lived. The days stretched longer. Ice cracked along the creek, breaking into dark rivulets, spilling through the marsh. Boots sank into mud instead of frost. The sky softened to blue, and the cottonwoods filled with bird calls again. Inside things shifted too. Ayanna had begun to hum softly, while she worked low sounds, not for show, just presence. Her movements grew lighter. She no longer braced when the door opened. No longer tensed when Nahuel passed close. She carried herself taller now, unafraid. Nahuel noticed every change, but said nothing. One afternoon, as she scraped wax from old candle stubs into a tin mold, he spoke without looking up. I could ride into town next week. Take the North Pass, keep off the main trail. She lifted her eyes. Why, post office sent word by trader. New federal man came through. Young, eager, says he's looking into bounty disputes and land claims. Her hands stilled. Does that mean they know I'm still alive? Not yet, Nahuel said. But if they ever tie my name to yours, they might come asking. Maybe not with guns, maybe just with papers. Ayanna Moonshadow was quiet for a long while. Then carefully she asked, would it change things if I wasn't just staying here? Nahuel Ironhawk looked at her closely. What do you mean? She folded the wax cloth and set it aside. You gave me shelter. A name. A place. But no one sees me on paper. No one knows I belong here in a way that can't be questioned. You're saying you want marriage, he said. She didn't flinch. I'm saying I want to be safe. He let out a slow breath, his chest tight. You think I wouldn't have offered if I thought it would leave you feeling alone? I don't want to be owned, she said plainly. I want to be chosen. Nahuel stood crossed the floor and knelt in front of her. I choose you, he said. Not because I must, not to keep men away, not because of law. I choose you because when I sit across this table from you, the world makes sense again. Her eyes welled, though no tears fell. Instead, she reached into her pouch and pulled out a small scrap of tanned leather. Burned into it were two symbols, one hers, the other a circle enclosing it. A mark she had once told him meant keeper. She held it out. You wear this, she said. Not for others to see, but inside your coat, close to your heart. He took it, nodded once. That night they didn't speak of it again, but in the morning she braided her hair tighter, tied a strip of cloth around her wrist, and pulled the blue dress she had stitched from Kiona's old curtains over a clean shift. I want the agent to see me, she said, not as something hidden. When they rode into town, Nahuel on horseback with Ayana behind him, they moved steady and unhurried. Eyes followed them. Whispers stirred. Some folks turned away. Others just watched. The young federal agent, clean-shaven and sharp, stood outside the post office with a notebook in hand. He studied them as they drew near. Nahuel dismounted, helped Ayana down without shame. You're Nahuel Ironhawk, the agent asked. He nodded. This is Ayana Moonshadow. She lives on my land, with me, by her choice. The agent blinked, glanced at her, then back at his notebook. She's Apache. She's a free woman, Nahuel said firmly, and you won't find her name on any bill of sale. Ayana stepped forward, voice steady. I am not a claim. I am not a debt. I belong where I choose to stay. And I have chosen. The agent hesitated, then shut his notebook. I'm not here to stir trouble, just to verify reports. You've verified, Nahuel said flatly. They left before sundown. Back at the cabin, Ayana hung her coat, untied the strip from her wrist, and laid it on the table. I wasn't afraid, she said, not even when he looked at me like I was a thing. You're not. She stepped close, pressed her forehead to his chest. I know that now. He wrapped his hand around her back, holding her steady. Outside, the wind picked up, but it wasn't bitter anymore. It carried change. Spring came early that year. By late March, the ground softened for planting. The creek, once a dry scar, flowed again, slow but steady. Nahuel dug irrigation channels by day, hauled stones at dusk. Ayana worked beside him. Sleeves, rolled-up boots, caked in mud, hair tied back with a strip of cloth. They didn't need many words. The cabin bore her mark now. Floors scrubbed, curtains repaired, new seams stitched where sunlight pierced through. The cradle stood finished in the corner, not dusty anymore, but lined with a small bundle of woven cloth and sage. Not for a child yet, but for hope. One morning, returning from the fence line, Nahuel spotted a lone rider on a black horse watching from the ridge. The man lingered motionless before turning and riding off. Nahuel didn't follow. When he stepped inside, Ayana was stirring a pot by the fire. You saw him? She asked. He nodded. Doesn't matter, she said. You think he'll return? No, she said quietly, rising to her full height. Because he saw what he needed to see. And what's that? That I'm not alone anymore. That night after supper, Nahuel reached for the small tin box he hadn't opened in 2 years. Inside the tin box lay papers, old land deeds, yellowed army letters, and a faded photograph of Kiona Dawn tucked into a worn church flyer. Nahuel Ironhawk spread them across the table, the weight of years pressing heavy on the wood. He sat down across from Ayana Moonshadow. "I want to make it legal," he said. She looked at the papers, eyes narrowing. "You mean marriage? I mean giving you my name. Not as a shield, not as a cover, but because you've already made this place yours." Ayana didn't smile, not quite, but her shoulders eased and her fingers settled gently over his hand. "You sure?" she asked softly. "I've lost once," he said. Her eyes searched his steady. "I didn't lose you," he added. The next morning, they stood beneath the old cottonwoods where the snow melt still soaked the soil. No crowd, no preacher, just the land as witness. He wore his cleanest shirt. She wore the blue dress she'd stitched from the curtains of another life. Nahuel unfolded a page he had written in his own hand and read aloud, his voice firm and plain. "This is not bound by law or papers. This is a choice. To stay. To build. To belong." Ayana repeated the words in English first, then in her Apache tongue, her voice clear, unwavering. When it was done, they buried the scrap of leather marked with her symbol beside the photograph of Kiona Dawn, deep beneath the roots of the tallest cottonwood. A life laid to rest. Another beginning. That evening, Nahuel carved a wooden sign with a single word, her name. He nailed it to the porch post. When Ayana saw it, she didn't speak. She only stepped behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and held on. Later in the cot, with the lamp snuffed out and the fire burning low, she whispered into the dark, "You kept me." He turned toward her, brushed her cheek with his hand. "No," he said quietly. "You stayed." Outside, the tall grass bent in the night wind. Inside, the silence was whole. Nothing felt unfinished anymore. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.